And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, Hilchos Tefillah, Siman, Sadi, learning about the obligation of davening with a minyan, Tefillah B'tzibur. We're holding in Sif Yud Zayin, Siman Yud Sadi, Siman Sadi, Sif Yud Zayin. Says the Mechaber, Yesh Misha Omer Shamikol Shekein, Shal Yashkem Adam Neilchem Meir Shemizvalim Boy Asara, Im Yachal Lavei Limchos Chafsa Beira Yem Gadol. You have to be careful that you don't want to put yourself into a situation that you have to travel alone after davening. Says Mishnah Berurah, this means you're going for an optional matter. Sounds like it's only going to be Tefillah B'tzibur. But without that reason, you're not allowed to go on the road before Shemona Esrei, Chlel Siman Pei Tesef Gimel. According to Ramah over there in Siman Pei Tes, so again, and this reminds us of the rule that if you said bracha is first, then you're allowed to travel. But here we're learning that, but you can't miss tefillah b'tzibur. This goes back that if you're going to miss your trip, then yes, that would be one of the reasons that you could potentially miss a minyan in order that you don't miss the shayara, you don't miss the caravan, you don't miss the flight, etc. Says the, and again, we remind yourself that Ramosha Feinstein learned that yishtadel means you go beyond the letter of the law, which means you make sure not to plan the flight that way, you make sure to have the minyan on the vacation, etc., etc. Says the Mechaber Sivir Ches, Beisa Medrash Kavua, Kodesh Yesir Beisa Knesses, Umitzah L'Spalabo Yesir Beisa Knesses, Yiva Beisa Medrash Kavua. It has more kedusha than a shul, and it's better to daven there. Vusha Yisbal Basar if you have a minyan. Hagal says Ramav Yeshaimim Dafilu B'lei Asara Adav L'Spalabo Beisa Medrash Kavua Allah. Even without a minyan, it's better to daven in the Beis Medrash. One who learns all day, first profession. He's never mevatel. So we'll see this doesn't really apply to almost anyone. It means you never mevatel for one moment. You shouldn't do this commonly. Because the people are going to say, hey, look, if this Talmud Chacham never left a shul, why do we have to? So one should be careful not to do this often. Again, one should not learn. We saw this yesterday. One should not learn at a time that the tzibur is saying slichos, etc. And that is the end of Sif Yud Ches. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, it's better to daven in the Beis Medrash if you have 10 people. Again, as we've seen that there's a mailah to daven with more people. So let's say the shul has more people than the Beis Medrash. We call Makkah and Beis Medrash. Adif, it's better to daven in the Beis Medrash. Vani Misha loy made by the Beis Medrash you learn in. Because you don't want to be mavatal to go travel to the shul. If you don't daven there, you're not learning there, and you have a question, go down in the Beis Medrash, go down in the shul, then the shul does win. Kain Kasav Hapri Megadim. And here a Pashat says the Mishnah Berurah, say Dafka beBeis Medrash shekavua liyachid lelimud. The loy kavua kedushas like kol kach. The Bati Midrash that we have, that the Rabbim learn there, Bivadai Kedushasai Chamura Yaiser Mibeis HaKnesses. Mutav L'Yispal Basar Yaiser Mibeis HaKnesses. It's better down there than down in the shul. Even Sheyish Bein Roivam, there's more people. Even if you don't learn there, and it's a startling fact. So now if we have a Beis Medrash, a yeshiva, let's call it, where there's people learning all day, now someone has a choice. I could go to the shul and daven with more people, or I could go daven in the yeshiva wins. Because when you have Lil Matayra Be'Rabim, that wins all. And of course, this as well gives us chizik. Many of our shuls are also Bati Midrashim. We also learn there. So if you take your shul, and you also have a Rabbim learning there, then you get both Mailos. Veina Misbatel, but said the Mishchab Ramah, this is only if one never stops learning. Ratzaleimar, Kim Ledvar Machrechim, Lezerchi Gufa Lamido, outside for the things he needs to do. Then you don't have to even leave the Beis Medrash for a minyan. If you don't even need 10 people. Certainly if you're learning with the Talmidim, and again, If this is relevant, if this applies to most people, we're going to leave it at that. Says Mishnah Berurah, Sivkatan and Zayin Shalo Yilmedu, but you have to be careful not to do this often because you don't want the Amaratim to learn from you. Because Amaratim are not necessarily going to say, oh, it's because you're such a Talmid Chacham, you don't want to be Mavatal Milimudai. Rakyam, you know what the Amaratim are going to say? Oh, that Talmid Chacham, he doesn't care about davening. And then he's going to say the same thing about himself, and he's not going to daven, and therefore one has to be careful, even if he has a heter to daven in the base of without a minyan, always to be cognizant not to do it often. Why? Because we don't want the Amaratim to learn from him. A very important halacha, which we're going to get to in Siman Kuf Mem Vav, during Kriyas HaTorah as well, you're not allowed to learn Torah. Kasav, we turn over the page, and with this we conclude. Kasav, B'Sefer Maimer Mordechai. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say you already davened. Says the Maimer Mordechai, you already davened. And you're only there to get an extra Shema, Kedusha, etc. So if you already davened and you happen to be sitting in a shul, the chiddush is then you're allowed to learn. You see how far this forbiddance to learn when the tzibur is davening goes. The issue over here is to be Payush Min Tzibur. The issue over here is if you're davening to stop davening and learn Torah, but if you're not davening, you just happen to be there while the minyan is davening, then you're yes allowed to learn. We'll pick it up from Siman Sif Yotes in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.